The owner of a failing restaurant let a stranger and his daughter stay, then discovered their dark secret in the heart of Chicago, a city teeming with life and secrets. A struggling restaurant owner makes a decision that will unravel a series of events he could never have foreseen. Jack's world is on the brink of collapse when he encounters a homeless man and his young daughter, offering them shelter in his failing restaurant. But what begins as an act of kindness soon reveals a mystery tied to his family's hidden past. Who is this man? And why does his presence feel eerily familiar? Stay tuned to uncover the shocking twists ahead. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Jack leaned against the counter of his once vibrant restaurant, the Silver Plate, staring at the foreclosure notice pinned to the door. The polished oak tables, now dusty and unused, echoed the memories of bustling weekends and lively chatter. A heavy sigh escaped his lips as he picked up the last of the chairs to stack them. The air inside smelled faintly of despair, mingling with the aroma of yesterday's burnt coffee. The door creaked open. At first, Jack thought it was another debt collector, but instead, he saw a frail man with disheveled hair, holding the hand of a young girl whose wide, curious eyes peered out from beneath a tattered hoodie. "Excuse me," the man said hesitantly, his voice a raspy whisper. "We just need a place to rest. Just for tonight." Jack hesitated. This was no longer a place for hospitality, but something about the man's demeanor, the way he shielded the girl from the cold wind outside, tugged at Jack's heart. "All right," he muttered reluctantly, unlocking the door wider. The girl looked up at Jack and gave him a shy, almost grateful smile. Jack noticed the key she clutched in her tiny hands, an ornate relic that seemed out of place with the rest of their meager belongings. "Thank you," the man said, guiding his daughter inside. "My name's Tom. This is Lily." As the night deepened, Jack found himself unable to sleep. Questions buzzed in his mind. Why did they seem so out of place, yet oddly familiar? And why was he so drawn to the key Lily held so tightly? He dismissed it as exhaustion and finally drifted into a restless sleep on the booth nearest the kitchen. The next morning, the whispers began. Neighbors who passed by the Silver Plate shot Jack odd glances, murmuring to one another about the strange guests in his restaurant. He brushed it off until Paul, his estranged brother, showed up unannounced. "You've lost it, Jack," Paul said sharply, his tailored suit a stark contrast to Jack's rumpled apron. "Letting strangers live here? This is why you're in this mess." Jack's jaw tightened. He hadn't seen Paul in years, not since their father's funeral. The bitter taste of unresolved family drama lingered in every word they exchanged. "Maybe if you'd helped me back then," Jack retorted, "I wouldn't have to make these decisions now." Paul's eyes flicked toward the back of the restaurant, where Lily sat quietly drawing on scraps of paper. "Do you even know who they are? What they're running from?" Jack didn't answer. Deep down, he knew Paul's suspicions weren't unfounded, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. That night, Jack found Tom in the kitchen, staring at an old black and white photo hanging by the bulletin board. It was a picture of their father with the restaurant staff decades ago. Tom's expression was unreadable, but his hand lingered on the edge of the frame. "You knew him, didn't you?" Jack asked, stepping closer. Tom stiffened, then shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about," but the way his fingers trembled as he withdrew from the photo told a different story. Jack's stomach churned. The pieces weren't adding up, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Tom's arrival was no coincidence. Before heading to bed, Jack noticed something on the counter: Lily's key. It was heavier than he'd imagined, cold to the touch, with intricate carvings along its surface. He traced his finger over the pattern, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. The key had unlocked something in him, a nagging suspicion that his family's legacy was more complicated than he ever imagined. As the hours ticked by, Jack's thoughts spiraled. Who were Tom and Lily, really? What secrets had his father taken to the grave? And why did he feel like the answers lay just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered? The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the empty restaurant, pulling Jack from his thoughts. He turned sharply, but saw no one. The air felt colder, heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jack clenched the key in his hand, unaware of the storm it would unleash. The decision to let Tom and Lily stay in the restaurant brought Jack more trouble than solace. As days turned into weeks, the once familiar surroundings of the Silver Plate began to feel alien and suffocating. Whispers from the community grew louder, rumors snaking their way into every corner of Jack's already fragile reputation. But the real challenges weren't coming from outside. They were brewing within the walls of the restaurant and within his family. The first crack in Jack's resolve came when Paul returned uninvited, barging through the door one rainy afternoon. His crisp suit was speckled with droplets, but his disdain for Jack's choices burned hotter than ever. "You're a disgrace to Dad's memory," Paul snapped, throwing his umbrella onto a chair. Jack glared at him. "Dad's memory? Or the legacy you've been trying to control since the day he died?" Paul ignored the jab, his gaze fixed on Lily, who sat at a table coloring with an almost eerie focus. "You don't know these people, Jack. You're making a fool of yourself. They're harmless." "Paul, a man and his daughter, what's the crime in helping them?" Paul's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Harmless? You don't even know their real names, do you?" Jack's face fell, but he didn't respond. Deep down, Paul's words struck a chord of doubt. He glanced at Tom, who was standing silently near the kitchen door, his expression unreadable. The tension thickened as the days passed. Tom remained withdrawn, offering vague responses to Jack's attempts at conversation. Lily, on the other hand, seemed unnaturally calm for a child in her situation. Her quiet demeanor unnerved Jack, especially when he caught her staring at the old photo of his father on the wall. One night, as Jack was locking up, he noticed Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding her key and whispering softly to herself. "What are you saying?" he asked gently, kneeling down to her level. Lily looked up, her large eyes filled with an innocence that felt almost too perfect. "It's a secret," she said simply. Jack tried to press her further, but she tightened her grip on the key and turned away. Something about her response unsettled him. Later, as he lay in bed in the upstairs loft of the restaurant, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Lily's secret was tied to something bigger, something his father might have hidden within these very walls. The following day, Jack received a visit from an old friend, Sarah, who used to work at the Silver Plate. She had heard the rumors about Jack's unusual new tenants and had come to see for herself. "Jack, this isn't like you," Sarah said, her tone laced with concern. "Taking in strangers? What's going on?" Jack shrugged, trying to downplay the situation. "They needed help, that's all." Sarah wasn't convinced. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Do you know who that man is? People are saying he's been hanging around this neighborhood for months, asking about the restaurant." "It's odd." Jack frowned. "What do you mean, asking about the restaurant?" Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen where Tom was busy scrubbing dishes. "I don't know. Just be careful, Jack." That night, Jack confronted Tom directly. "Why were you asking about this place before you came here?" Jack demanded, his voice steady but firm. Tom froze, his back to Jack as he rinsed a plate. "I wasn't," he said after a long pause. "You're lying," Jack said, stepping closer. "I've given you food, shelter, and now people are telling me you've been snooping around for months." "Why?" Tom turned around slowly, his face unreadable. "Because I used to work here, a long time ago." The admission hit Jack like a punch to the gut. "What? I was one of your father's employees," Tom continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I didn't leave on good terms, and that's all you need to know." Jack's hands clenched in two fists. "That's not enough, Tom. If you're hiding something about my family, I deserve to know." Tom shook his head. "Some truths aren't worth knowing, Jack. Let it go." But Jack couldn't let it go. Not now. Not when the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to surface. Later that evening, Jack found himself staring at the locked door to the basement, a part of the restaurant he had never thought twice about. His father had always kept it off limits, calling it storage, but Jack had never seen what lay beyond. Taking a deep breath, Jack retrieved the key Lily always carried. It fit the lock perfectly. The sound of the tumblers clicking into place sent a chill down his spine. As the door creaked open, a faint musty smell wafted out. The room was dark, cluttered with boxes and old furniture. Jack's eyes scanned the space, landing on a chest tucked into the far corner. Before he could take another step, he heard a soft voice behind him. "You shouldn't be here." Jack turned sharply to find Lily standing in the doorway, her expression calm, but her words filled with warning. "Why not?" he asked. She clutched her key tightly and simply said, "Because it's not ready yet." The cryptic response left Jack reeling as Lily disappeared back into the shadows, leaving him alone with more questions than ever. The unease that had taken root in Jack's heart was growing. Whatever secrets Tom and Lily were hiding, they were far more dangerous than he had imagined. And as he stood in the cold, dark basement, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just opened the door to something he couldn't close. Jack couldn't stop thinking about the basement and the chest tucked away in the corner. The key in his pocket felt heavier by the minute, as if it carried the weight of answers he wasn't sure he was ready to face. His curiosity gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into the mystery that had slowly begun to unravel. Who was Tom, really? And why did Lily seem to know more than she let on? The whispers in the neighborhood had grown louder, spreading like wildfire. Jack's once quiet life had turned into a stage for gossip, with Tom and Lily as the unwelcome stars. But the murmurs weren't just about Jack's act of kindness anymore. They hinted at something much darker, something tied to his family's past. One afternoon, Jack decided to confront Tom again, determined to dig deeper. He found him sitting in the kitchen, his rough hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. "Tom," Jack began, his tone firm but not unkind, "you said you worked here for my father. What happened?" Tom looked up, his eyes guarded. "I already told you, it didn't end well." "That's not enough," Jack pressed, pulling out the photo he had found of his father with the restaurant staff. "You're in this picture, aren't you?" Tom's jaw tightened as his gaze fell on the photograph. He didn't deny it. Instead, he let out a slow, heavy sigh. "Yes," he admitted. "I worked here when your father ran this place. But things got complicated. I don't think you'd want to know the details." Jack's frustration bubbled over. "Stop telling me what I don't want to know and just tell me the truth." Tom stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the tiled floor. "Your father wasn't the man you think he was, Jack. He built this restaurant on lies. And when those lies started to crumble, people like me paid the price." Jack was stunned into silence. His father, the man he had idolized for so long, now seemed like a stranger. But Tom didn't elaborate further. Instead, he walked away, leaving Jack with more questions than answers. Later that evening, Jack decided to investigate on his own. He waited until Tom and Lily were asleep before slipping into the basement. The room was as he had left it, the chest sitting in the corner like a silent sentinel. Using Lily's key, he unlocked the chest and opened it slowly. Inside, he found old papers, contracts, receipts, and letters. As he sifted through them, a pattern began to emerge. The documents hinted at illegal dealings, shady business loans, unpaid debts, and connections to people Jack had never heard of. But one letter stood out. It was addressed to Tom and written in his father's handwriting. "Tom, your loyalty has been invaluable, but I can't afford to keep you here anymore. You've become a liability. Take what you can and leave. If you say anything, you know the consequences." Jack's stomach churned. The words painted a picture of a man who had used and discarded people without a second thought. He felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but also a gnawing guilt. Was this the legacy he had unknowingly inherited? The next morning, Jack confronted Tom with the letter. "Why didn't you tell me my father did this to you?" Tom's face darkened as he read the letter. "Because I didn't think you'd believe me. People like your father don't leave room for the truth. They rewrite it to suit their needs." Jack struggled to process the revelation. "So why come back now? Why bring Lily into this?" Tom hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the door where Lily stood silently watching them. "Because I wanted her to know the truth, and because your father owes me more than he could ever repay." "What truth?" Jack demanded. Tom didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Jack to wrestle with the growing storm of emotions inside him. As the days passed, Jack's relationship with Paul deteriorated further. Paul, sensing Jack's growing doubts about their father, began to lash out. "You're really going to believe the word of a drifter over your own family?" Paul sneered during one particularly heated argument, I don't know what to believe anymore, Jack admitted. But I know there's more to this than what you've told me. Paul's eyes narrowed. You don't want to dig too deep, Jack. Some things are better left buried. The threat in his words was unmistakable. For the first time, Jack began to suspect that Paul wasn't just trying to protect their father's reputation, he was hiding something far more sinister. One evening, Jack found Lily sitting at the same table where she always drew her pictures. This time, she had sketched something that sent a chill down his spine. The basement, complete with the chest and the key. Lily, Jack said cautiously, how did you know about this? She looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Daddy told me. What else did he tell you? Jack asked, his voice trembling. Lily hesitated, then whispered, that there's more to find, but it's dangerous. Jack's heart pounded. What else could be hidden in this restaurant? And why was Lily, a child, so calm about it? That night, Jack couldn't sleep. The weight of the revelations, the secrets, and the lies pressed down on him like a suffocating fog. He knew he couldn't stop now. Whatever the truth was, he had to uncover it even if it shattered everything he thought he knew about his family. As he sat in the darkened restaurant, staring at the basement door, he felt the first stirrings of fear. He wasn't just uncovering his father's secrets anymore. He was stepping into a web of deceit that could destroy him and everyone around him. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching. The growing tension at the silver plate was suffocating. Every interaction, every glance, and every conversation carried an undercurrent of suspicion and unspoken truths. Jack felt the weight of his discoveries pressing down on him, but the people around him seemed determined to keep the full picture hidden. Paul's hostility, Tom's evasiveness, and Lily's cryptic remarks only deepened the mystery. And then, Paul made his next move. It was a brisk autumn morning when Paul arrived unannounced once more, his polished demeanor masking an air of barely restrained fury. He stood in the doorway, surveying the restaurant as if it were his personal battleground. "We need to talk," Paul said, his voice cold and sharp. Jack crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "If this is another lecture about my choices, save it." Paul stepped closer, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. "This isn't about your choices anymore, Jack. It's about protecting our family name." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Protecting it from what?" "The truth." Paul's eyes narrowed. "From people like them," he said, nodding toward Tom and Lily, who were seated in the corner. "You think they just showed up here by coincidence? Open your eyes. They're using you." Jack bristled. "Using me? For what?" Paul leaned in, his expression dark. "Do you know what Dad left behind in this place? Do you even understand the mess he created? Those two aren't here for your charity, they're here to take what they think belongs to them." Jack's stomach turned. "And how would you know that, Paul? Unless you're hiding something too." Paul straightened, his lips curling into a bitter smirk. "You wouldn't understand. You were always the dreamer, the one who never wanted to see the ugly side of things. But this is bigger than you, Jack." Before Jack could respond, Paul stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The air in the restaurant felt heavier, as if Paul had left behind a storm cloud that refused to dissipate. That evening, Jack decided to confront Tom again. The older man was in the kitchen, carefully chopping vegetables, as if the world around him didn't exist. "Paul seems to think you're here for something specific," Jack said, his tone accusatory. "What is it, Tom? What aren't you telling me?" Tom paused, his knife hovering over the cutting board. For a moment, he didn't say anything, but then he set the knife down and turned to face Jack. "You really want to know?" Tom asked, his voice low and steady. Jack nodded, his jaw tight. Tom exhaled slowly. "Your father owed me more than just money. He owed me my life. And when he couldn't pay that debt, he tried to bury me, literally and figuratively." Jack blinked, his mind racing to process the words. "What are you talking about?" "I was his right-hand man," Tom continued. "I helped him build this place. But when things started to go wrong, when the deals he made turned sour, he threw me under the bus. Ruined my reputation, my career, everything. And now," Tom's voice broke, his gaze flickering toward Lily. "Now, all I have left is her." Jack's heart ached at the raw pain in Tom's voice. But his questions only multiplied. And the key? What's it for? What's in that chest downstairs? Tom's expression hardened. Things you're better off leaving alone. Trust me, Jack, some truths will only destroy you. But Jack couldn't leave it alone. That night, he returned to the basement, determined to uncover the full extent of his father's secrets. As he rummaged through the chest, he found more incriminating documents, financial records, correspondence with unsavory individuals, and detailed notes about a deal gone horribly wrong. One name kept appearing in the papers: Jonathan Keller. Jack had never heard the name before, but it was clear that this man had been deeply involved with his father and with Tom. Before Jack could delve deeper, he heard a creak behind him. He turned sharply, his heart pounding, only to find Lily standing in the doorway again. "You're not supposed to be here," she said softly, her tone eerily calm. Jack frowned. "Lily, why do you keep saying that? What aren't you telling me?" Lily hesitated, her small hands clutching the edge of the doorframe. "Daddy said it's dangerous, that it might hurt you too." Jack knelt down, trying to meet her gaze. "Lily, I need to know, please. What does this all mean?" But Lily didn't answer. She turned and walked away, leaving Jack alone in the dimly lit basement. The next day, Paul returned, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought a lawyer with him, a sharp-dressed woman who introduced herself as Miss Blake. "We're here to settle this once and for all," Paul declared, his voice filled with cold authority. "Settle what?" Jack asked, already on edge. "The ownership of this property," Miss Blake interjected. "Your brother has a valid claim to the silver plate, and he's prepared to take legal action if necessary." Jack's temper flared. "This is still my restaurant, Paul. You can't just waltz in and take it from me." Paul's smirk returned. "We'll see about that." As the argument escalated, Tom stepped out of the kitchen, his presence silencing the room. He locked eyes with Paul, and for a brief moment, the tension between them crackled like static electricity. "Looks like the gang's all here," Tom said dryly. Paul sneered. "Don't think for a second that I've forgotten about you, old man. You're just as much a problem as he is." Tom chuckled darkly. Funny, coming from the golden boy who always cleaned up his daddy's messes. Jack's gaze darted between the two men, his mind racing. It was clear now that Paul and Tom shared a history. He had only scratched the surface of a history that threatened to tear his family apart. That night, Jack sat alone in the restaurant, replaying the day's events in his mind. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. But the picture they painted was darker than he had ever imagined. And somewhere in the shadows, the storm was still brewing. The storm brewing around the silver plate began to seep into every corner of Jack's life. The restaurant no longer felt like the sanctuary it had once been. It was a battleground. Paul's legal threats, Tom's cryptic revelations, and Lily's unsettling calm left Jack questioning everything he thought he knew about his family. Yet, the most significant revelations were still waiting in the shadows, and Jack could feel them closing in. The breaking point came one afternoon when Jack, still reeling from his confrontation with Paul and Tom, found an old, faded photograph tucked away in the chest he had opened in the basement. It was a picture of his father, standing arm in arm with Jonathan Keller, the name that had appeared repeatedly in the incriminating documents. But there was something else in the photo that made Jack's breath catch in his throat. Behind his father and Keller stood a much younger Tom, his face tense and unsmiling. Jack's hands trembled as he held the photograph. He had suspected Tom's connection to his father ran deeper than mere employment, but this image confirmed it. Why had Tom been so reluctant to talk about this man? And what had happened between Keller and his father that made Tom a pawn in their game? That evening, Jack confronted Tom again, this time with the photograph. "Explain this," Jack demanded, placing the picture on the counter in front of Tom. Tom stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice low. "In the basement," Jack replied, "with all the other secrets my father tried to bury." "Who is Keller, Tom? And why does his name keep showing up?" Tom's jaw tightened, and he let out a heavy sigh. "Jonathan Keller was your father's partner. Not in the restaurant business, in something darker," Jack's stomach churned. What do you mean, darker? Tom hesitated before continuing. Your father and Keller used this place as a front for laundering money. They made deals with people you wouldn't want to cross, people who didn't care about collateral damage. When things went south, Keller disappeared, and your father was left to clean up the mess. That's when he turned on me. Jack's mind reeled. The man he had idolized had been nothing more than a criminal hiding behind the veneer of a hard-working restaurateur. Why didn't you go to the police? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom scoffed. You think the police would have taken my word over his? Your father had connections everywhere. He made sure no one would believe me. Jack felt a pang of guilt, but his anger quickly overtook it. So you came back to drag all of this into the light? Tom met Jack's gaze. His expression hardened. I came back for justice for me and for Lily. Your father stole everything from me, and it's time you knew the truth. Later that night, as Jack sifted through the remaining documents in the chest, he found something even more shocking. A letter addressed to Paul. Paul, I'm leaving this in your hands. If Keller comes back, you know what to do. Don't let him ruin what we've built. Protect the family at all costs. The implications were clear. Paul had been complicit in their father's crimes. He had known all along and had actively worked to keep the truth buried. The next morning, Jack confronted Paul, the letter clenched tightly in his hand. You knew, Jack said, his voice shaking with anger. You knew what Dad was doing, and you helped him cover it up. Paul didn't deny it. Instead, he crossed his arms and stared Jack down. Of course I knew. Someone had to keep this family from falling apart. Falling apart? Jack repeated, incredulous. Dad was a criminal, Paul. He ruined lives, and you helped him do it. Paul's eyes narrowed. And what would you have done, Jack? Played the hero? Gotten yourself killed? You were always too naive to understand what it takes to survive in this world. Jack's fists clenched at his sides. This isn't survival, Paul. This is betrayal. Paul smirked. Call it what you want, but if you think I'm going to let you ruin everything now, you're even dumber than I thought. Meanwhile, Tom had begun acting more erratically. He spent hours pacing the restaurant, his eyes darting to the windows as if expecting someone or something to appear. When Jack confronted him about it, Tom admitted his fear. Keller's still out there, Tom said, and if he finds out you've been digging into this, he won't stop until he gets what he wants. What does he want? Jack asked. Tom's face darkened. The money. Your father hid it somewhere, and Keller's been looking for it ever since he disappeared. If he thinks we know where it is. Jack didn't need Tom to finish the sentence. The stakes had just been raised, and Jack realized he was no longer just fighting to uncover the truth, he was fighting to survive. That night, Jack decided to take matters into his own hands. He returned to the basement, determined to find anything that might give him an edge. He searched every corner of the room, every box and shelf, until he found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small, locked safe. Lily's key fit perfectly. When Jack opened the safe, his breath caught. Inside was a stack of cash, old and weathered but still valuable, along with a small ledger detailing every deal his father and Keller had made. The truth was finally laid bare, but it came with a heavy price. Jack knew that exposing this would not only destroy his father's reputation, but also put him, Tom, and Lily in even greater danger. And as he stood there, staring at the contents of the safe, he heard a noise from upstairs, a door creaking open, followed by heavy footsteps. Someone else was in the restaurant. Jack froze, the weight of the truth pressing down on him as the sound of footsteps echoed through the restaurant above. His heart pounded, the ledger and cash clutched tightly in his hands. The safe was still open, its secrets exposed. Whoever was up there wasn't supposed to be. Taking a deep breath, Jack slipped the ledger into his jacket and carefully placed the cash back into the safe. He closed it as quietly as possible, his fingers fumbling with the key. Then, creeping up the basement stairs, he prepared himself for whatever or whoever awaited him. Emerging from the basement, Jack's eyes darted around the dimly lit restaurant. At first, everything seemed normal, but then he saw the silhouette of a man standing near the front door. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded a menacing presence. "Who's there?" Jack demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. The man turned slowly, stepping into the light. His face was sharp and weathered, his piercing eyes taking in every detail of the room. He looked like someone who had lived a hard life and wasn't afraid to make it harder for others. "Jonathan Keller," the man said simply, his voice as cold as ice. Jack's blood ran cold. Keller, the name that had haunted the documents and the stories Tom had told, was standing right in front of him. "I figured you'd be the one digging into your father's mess," Keller continued, a smirk playing on his lips. "Like father, like son, right?" Jack squared his shoulders, refusing to show fear. "What do you want?" Keller chuckled darkly. "What I've always wanted, what your father stole from me. And judging by the look on your face, I'd say you found it." Before Jack could respond, Tom appeared from the kitchen, his face pale but determined. "Keller," Tom said, his voice tense, "leave him out of this. You've got a problem with me, not him." Keller's smirk widened. Tom, always the loyal soldier, aren't you? Still cleaning up after your boss's mess, even after all these years." "This isn't about loyalty," Tom shot back. "It's about doing what's right." Keller's expression darkened. "What's right? Don't make me laugh. You were as deep in this as anyone, Tom. Don't pretend you're some kind of saint now." Jack watched the exchange, his mind racing. It was clear that Keller wasn't here to negotiate, he was here to take what he believed was his, no matter the cost. As the tension in the room thickened, Lily emerged from the shadows, clutching her key tightly. Her presence seemed to catch Keller off guard. "And who's this?" Keller asked, his tone dripping with mockery. "Your little accomplice? She's got nothing to do with this," Tom said quickly. Stepping in front of Lily, Keller tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, I think she has everything to do with this. After all, she's holding the key to my fortune, isn't she?" Jack's heart sank. Keller had pieced it together. The key, the safe, the money, it all pointed to the treasure Keller had been hunting for years. Before Keller could make another move, the front door burst open, and Paul stormed in, flanked by two burly men in suits. "Jonathan," Paul said, his tone sharp and commanding. "You're trespassing." Keller raised an eyebrow, seemingly unfazed. "Paul, always the fixer. Aren't you? Here to sweep up another one of Daddy's messes." Paul ignored the jab, turning to Jack. "Get out of here, Jack. This doesn't concern you." Jack bristled. "The hell it doesn't. This is my restaurant, and my life you're all tearing apart." Paul sighed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Keller's not someone you can reason with, and you are?" Jack shot back, his voice rising. "You've been lying to me my whole life, Paul. I'm done letting you call the shots." Keller laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Well, this is entertaining, a good old-fashioned family feud. But let's not forget why we're all here." He turned back to Jack, his smile disappearing. "Give me what I came for, or I'll make sure you regret it." The room fell into tense silence. Jack's mind raced as he tried to figure out his next move. Keller was clearly dangerous, but Paul wasn't much better, and Tom, for all his good intentions, was just as tangled in the web of lies and deceit as the rest of them. Finally, Jack spoke. "You want the money? Fine. But you're not getting away with this." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the ledger, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is the truth," Jack said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Everything you, Keller, and Dad did is in here. If you think I'm going to let you destroy what's left of my family's name, you're dead wrong." Paul's face darkened, but before he could respond, Keller lunged toward Jack, his movements quick and violent. Tom stepped in, blocking Keller's path and shoving him back. "Run, Jack," Tom shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Jack hesitated for only a moment before grabbing Lily's hand and bolting for the back door. Behind him, the sounds of a struggle echoed through the restaurant. Outside, the cool night air hit Jack like a slap to the face. He and Lily ran down the alley, his mind racing with questions and fears. What had he just unleashed, and would he ever be able to set things right? As they stopped to catch their breath, Lily looked up at Jack, her wide eyes filled with both fear and determination. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked softly. Jack knelt down, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I promise I'll do everything I can to protect you." In the distance, he could hear sirens approaching. The truth was finally coming to light. But it was far from over. Keller was still out there, and so were the secrets Jack had yet to uncover. For now, all he could do was keep running and hope that the storm wouldn't catch up to them. The silence of the night was deceptive. As Jack led Lily away from the silver plate, his mind swirled with fear and determination. The ledger tucked inside his jacket was his only leverage, but it was also a ticking time bomb. Keller wanted it, Paul wanted to suppress it, and Tom. Jack wasn't even sure where Tom's loyalties truly lay anymore. Jack knew they couldn't keep running. He needed answers, and he needed a plan. Somewhere in the chaos of his family's past lay the truth, and it was time to unearth it even if it shattered everything. Jack's first stop was Sarah's apartment. His childhood friend and former restaurant employee had always been someone he could trust, and he prayed that trust hadn't eroded under the weight of the secrets he now carried. When Sarah opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. "Jack, what's going on? And who's this?" she asked, gesturing to Lily, who clung to Jack's hand. "It's a long story," Jack said, stepping inside. "But I need your help." Over cups of hastily made coffee, Jack laid out everything: the documents, the ledger, Keller's arrival, and Paul's complicity. Sarah listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to concern as the story unfolded. "This is insane," she said finally, shaking her head. "I mean, I always knew your dad was complicated, but this?" Jack nodded. "It's worse than I ever imagined. And now Keller's back, and Paul's trying to cover it all up. I don't know who to trust anymore." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. "You can trust me, but Jack, this is dangerous. If Keller's as bad as you say, and Paul's involved, you're playing with fire." "I don't have a choice," Jack said firmly. "I have to finish what my father started. I have to fix this." The next morning, Jack and Sarah began combing through the ledger in search of clues. It was dense with cryptic notes and coded entries, but one name kept appearing: the Black Oak Club. "What's that?" Sarah asked, pointing to one of the entries. "I don't know," Jack admitted, "but it's listed alongside some of the biggest transactions. It has to mean something." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "It sounds like a place. Maybe somewhere they used to meet." Jack nodded. "If it is, it's where we'll find answers." With Lily staying safely with Sarah, Jack headed out to investigate. After hours of scouring old directories and asking around discreetly, he finally found a lead. The Black Oak Club was an abandoned speakeasy on the outskirts of the city, a relic from Chicago's Prohibition days. As Jack stood outside the crumbling building that night, his pulse quickened. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, but he pushed forward, determined to find the truth. Inside, the speakeasy was a dusty maze of forgotten tables, broken chandeliers, and faded grandeur. Jack's flashlight cut through the darkness as he searched for anything that might shed light on his father's dealings. In the back room, he found it, a hidden safe embedded in the wall. Unlike the one in the restaurant, this safe was larger, its lock more intricate. Jack knew he couldn't open it without help, but he also knew it held something crucial. Just as he was examining the safe, he heard a sound behind him, a faint scuff of shoes against the floor. Looking for something, Jack spun around to find Keller standing in the doorway, his face partially obscured by shadows. "How did you find me?" Jack asked, his voice tight. Keller chuckled. "You're not as sneaky as you think, kid. And besides, I've been watching you since you left the restaurant. You're leading me right to everything I need." Jack's mind raced. He was alone, outmatched, and cornered. But then Keller stepped closer, his eyes flicking to the safe. "So, this is where your dad hid the rest of it," Keller said, almost to himself. "Smart man. Too bad he wasn't smart enough to stay ahead of me." Jack knew he had to stall. "You think breaking into that safe is going to solve everything? It won't. This is bigger than money, Keller." Keller smirked. "Spare me the lecture. Your father made a deal with me, and he broke it. I'm just here to collect what's mine, Before Keller could take another step, the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the tension. Moments later, the door to the speakeasy swung open, and Paul entered, flanked by his ever-present bodyguards. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Paul said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Keller's smirk disappeared. "Stay out of this, Paul. This is between me and your brother." Paul crossed his arms. "Funny, because it looks like it's about me cleaning up another one of Dad's disasters." The two men glared at each other, their animosity palpable. Jack took the opportunity to edge closer to the safe, his mind racing for a plan. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the room as one of Paul's bodyguards slammed the door shut. "This ends now," Paul said, stepping toward Keller. "You've been a thorn in my side for long enough." Keller laughed darkly. "Oh, Paul, you think you're in control here? That's adorable." The tension boiled over, and within seconds, chaos erupted. Keller lunged at Paul, while the bodyguards tried to intervene. Jack used the distraction to snap a picture of the safe serial number and bolt for the exit. As he ran into the night, he could still hear the sounds of the struggle behind him. He didn't know how it would end, but he knew one thing: he was closer to the truth than ever. Back at Sarah's apartment, Jack quickly jotted down the serial number and hid the ledger in a safer spot. He had uncovered the next piece of the puzzle, but the cost of his discoveries was growing. Sitting by the window, he watched Lily sleeping peacefully on the couch. Her presence was a stark reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just about his father's sins anymore, it was about ensuring a future free from their shadow. But Jack knew that the storm was far from over. Keller wasn't done. Paul wasn't done. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Jack still had to find a way to bring everything to light without losing the people who mattered most. The weight of the past was unbearable, yet Jack couldn't stop now. Every discovery felt like pulling at the edge of a thread that threatened to unravel his entire world. The photograph, the ledger, and the safe at the Black Oak Club were pieces of a puzzle that painted a sinister picture of his father's life. But there were still unanswered questions, and the secrets were taking a toll. The following morning, Sarah woke Jack early. Her face was pale, and her voice was tense. "Jack, Paul's looking for you. He came by last night after you left. He's desperate, and I don't think he's playing by any rules anymore." Jack sighed, rubbing his face. "Of course, he's desperate. That safe at the Black Oak Club has everything he's trying to hide, and Keller won't stop until he gets to it first." Sarah leaned against the kitchen counter, her arms crossed. "What's the plan, Jack? You can't keep running like this. And Lily, she needs stability, not chaos." Jack glanced at Lily, who sat quietly at the table, drawing another one of her cryptic pictures. He clenched his fists. "I'll protect her, no matter what. But first, I need to confront Paul. He knows more than he's letting on, and I'm done playing his games." That afternoon, Jack made his way to Paul's office in the city. The sleek, glass-paneled building was a stark contrast to the dilapidated charm of the Silver Plate. Jack felt out of place as he stepped into the lobby, but his determination carried him forward. When he entered Paul's office, his brother was seated at his desk, flanked by the two bodyguards Jack had seen at the Black Oak Club. "You've got guts showing up here," Paul said, leaning back in his chair. "What do you want?" Jack threw the ledger onto the desk. "I want the truth, Paul. About Dad. About Keller. About why you've been trying to keep this all buried." Paul's expression darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Jack shot back. "I know about the laundering. I know about Keller's deals. I even know about the Black Oak Club. So why don't you stop pretending and just tell me what's really going on?" Paul hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then he gestured for the bodyguards to leave the room. Once they were gone, he leaned forward, his voice low. "Dad wasn't just laundering money, Jack. He was protecting something bigger than Keller. Bigger than you and me." Jack frowned. "Protecting what?" Paul hesitated again before finally speaking. "There was a group powerful people who used the Black Oak Club as their meeting place. Dad was their middleman, their cleaner. When things went wrong, he made them disappear. Keller was just a piece of the puzzle, one of the many people Dad burned along the way." Jack's stomach churned. "And you went along with it?" Paul's face hardened. I didn't have a choice. When Dad died, those people came to me. They told me if I didn't keep the operation running, they'd ruin us. I was trying to protect the family. Jack shook his head in disbelief. Protect the family? You've done nothing but lie and destroy everything Dad left behind. Paul stood abruptly, slamming his hands on the desk. Don't you dare judge me. Jack, you don't know what it's like to carry this weight. You've been living in your little dream world while I've been keeping us afloat. Their argument was interrupted by a loud crash. One of the bodyguards burst into the room, his face pale. Keller's here, he said breathlessly. Jack and Paul exchanged a look before sprinting out of the office. In the lobby, Keller stood like a predator, his cold eyes scanning the room. Ah, the brothers unite, Keller said with a smirk. How touching. What do you want, Keller? Paul demanded. Keller tilted his head. What I've always wanted. The money, the power, and a little justice for what your father did to me. You're not getting anything, Jack said, stepping forward. Keller laughed darkly. You're brave, kid. I'll give you that. But bravery won't get you far when you're playing in the big leagues. Before anyone could react, Keller reached into his coat, pulling out a gun. The lobby erupted into chaos. Jack grabbed Paul, pulling him behind a pillar as Keller's bodyguards moved to intercept him. Shouts and scuffles echoed through the space, and Jack's heart pounded as he realized just how far Keller was willing to go to get what he wanted. We have to get out of here, Paul muttered, his voice shaking. You think? Jack snapped. The brothers made their way to the emergency exit, narrowly avoiding Keller's line of sight. Once outside, they ran down the alley, their breath visible in the cold air. This is out of control, Paul said. Leaning against a wall, Keller's gone completely rogue. Jack glared at him. You think this is my fault? You're the one who kept all of this going. Paul didn't respond, his head hanging low. For the first time, Jack saw genuine regret in his brother's eyes. Back at Sarah's apartment, Jack paced the living room while Paul sat silently on the couch. Lily watched them both with wide eyes, her sketchpad clutched tightly to her chest. We can't keep running, Jack said finally. Keller won't stop until he gets what he wants. And now, thanks to you, he knows exactly where to find us. Paul looked up, his expression weary. So what do we do? Jack hesitated, then turned to Sarah. We need to open that safe at the Black Oak Club. Whatever's in there, it's the only way to end this. Paul frowned. You think that's a good idea? What if it makes things worse? Jack's jaw tightened. How much worse can it get? The decision was made. Jack, Paul, and Sarah would return to the Black Oak Club that night, hoping to finally uncover the secrets hidden within the safe. But as Jack looked at Lily, who had fallen asleep on the couch, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he sought might not bring peace. They might bring something far darker. The night was eerily quiet as Jack, Paul, and Sarah approached the Black Oak Club. The once glamorous speakeasy stood in decayed defiance, its crumbling facade bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. Jack's grip on Lily's key tightened as they made their way through the shadows. He felt the weight of the moment. Everything was leading to this. For better or worse, the truth lay inside. The group entered cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the empty space. The air was heavy with dust and the scent of abandonment. Jack led the way to the back room where the safe was hidden. Are you sure about this? Sarah whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. We don't have a choice, Jack replied, his voice steady despite the dread creeping into his chest. Paul said nothing, his jaw clenched as he stared at the safe. The ledger, the documents, the lies, all of it pointed to this final piece of the puzzle. Jack knelt in front of the safe, inserting Lily's key into the lock. The mechanism clicked loudly, and the door creaked open, revealing a small metal box inside. The box was deceptively plain, but as Jack lifted the lid, its contents sent a shiver down his spine. Inside were stacks of old bills, bound together with faded rubber bands, and a small black notebook. The notebook's cover was scuffed and worn, its edges frayed from years of handling. What is it? Sarah asked, leaning closer. Jack opened the notebook, his hands trembling. Inside were pages filled with names, dates, and transactions, meticulously detailed records of every deal his father had ever made. But it wasn't just about money. The names included powerful figures, politicians, business moguls, and even law enforcement officials. Each entry painted a damning portrait of corruption, betrayal, and greed. "This is it," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the proof of everything." Paul stepped forward, his face pale as he scanned the pages. "This will ruin them all," he muttered. "Not just Dad, but everyone who worked with him." "That's the point," Jack replied, his voice hard. "It's time to end this." Before they could say more, the sound of heavy footsteps filled the air. Jack's head snapped up, his heart racing. "Keller," Paul muttered, his voice dripping with dread. The man emerged from the shadows, his sharp features illuminated by the faint moonlight streaming through a cracked window. He was alone this time, but the cold fury in his eyes was more terrifying than any backup he could have brought. Well, Keller said, his voice low and menacing. "You found it. Good for you." Jack stood, holding the notebook tightly. "It's over, Keller. The truth is here, and you're not getting it." Keller chuckled darkly. "You think a little notebook can stop me? I've spent my life dealing with people like you. Do you know what happens to idealists, Jack? They don't survive." Keller lunged, but Paul stepped in his path, shoving him back. "Stay away from him," Paul snarled, his voice filled with a rare fierceness. Keller's smirk vanished, replaced by a snarl. "You've always been a coward, Paul, hiding behind your father's name, letting him clean up your messes." Paul's fist clenched, but before he could respond, Jack spoke. "This ends now," Jack said firmly. "You're not walking out of here with this." Keller's gaze flicked between the three of them, and for a moment, Jack thought he saw a flicker of uncertainty in the man's eyes. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold calculation. "You don't get it, do you?" Keller said, his voice laced with venom. "This isn't about you. It's about power. And if you think you can take that from people like me, you're more naive than I thought." Before Keller could make another move, the sound of sirens echoed outside. Jack felt a surge of relief as he realized Sarah's plan had worked. She had called the police before they entered the club. Keller's expression darkened as he heard the sirens, his plans unraveling in real time. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "It's never over." As the police stormed the building, Keller made a break for the exit, but the officers quickly subdued him. Jack watched as they handcuffed the man who had been a specter over his life for weeks, dragging him out into the night. Back at Sarah's apartment, the weight of the night finally hit Jack. He sat at the kitchen table, the black notebook resting in front of him. Paul sat across from him, silent and brooding. "What now?" Paul asked, his voice weary. Jack looked at him, his expression resolute. "Now, we make it right. We take this to the authorities. All of it." Paul's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Jack nodded. "Dad's legacy doesn't deserve to be protected anymore. If this ruins us, so be it. I'd rather lose everything than live under this shadow." Paul said nothing, but Jack could see the conflict in his eyes. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The notebook, along with the ledger and other documents, became the center of a massive investigation. Names were exposed, arrests were made, and the web of corruption Jack's father had helped build was dismantled piece by piece. The silver plate was gone, but Jack felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. One evening, as Jack sat with Lily on a park bench, she handed him one of her drawings. It was a picture of the restaurant, surrounded by bright colors and smiling faces. "Do you miss it?" Lily asked softly. Jack smiled, his heart aching with both nostalgia and hope. "Sometimes, but it's better this way." Lily nodded, her small hand slipping into his. "We're safe now, right?" Jack squeezed her hand. "Yes, Lily, we're safe now." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack looked out at the city, a sense of calm washing over him. The past would always be there, but for the first time, it no longer controlled him. The future was his to shape, and this time, he would build it with truth.